Welcome to the Filmlings Podcast,
a weekly podcast where we analyze all that goes into effective filmmaking.
I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Alex.
And this is week 50, concluding with Christmas. 50,
we made it.
Alex.
We made it. We did it.
Yeah.
We did 50 episodes. They all said we couldn't do it. Actually, no one said we couldn't do it, but we did it.
We started this podcast, we started watching our films week 1 of January of this year, and we have now made it pretty much a full year. We're taking 2 weeks off, as is fairly customary among podcasts. But yeah, this is a big deal. We kept this up for 12 months, Alex.
Yeah. It's been 50 weeks of making podcasts and 50 weeks of watching movies. So many movies. Not that I'm complaining. I loved all the movies. Well, not all the movies. King Kong 1970 springs to mind. But it's been a blast. It's been a big learning experience, which is why we did it.
Absolutely.
And it's been a lot of fun in the process. And for all of those listeners out there who have found us, who've enjoyed our episodes, enjoyed any of our episodes or enjoyed all of them, those who've chimed in for one episode or chimed in for all of them, thank you so much for listening. I just want to take a moment and say thank you. We really appreciate you guys coming on to listen to us geek out about one of our favorite things in the world, movies.
Yeah, we did this as kind of just a way for us to watch and think about movies. But if we can share that with even one person and make them think about movies a little bit differently, or go out and watch a movie that they might not have typically seen, then I feel like we have a mission accomplished.
Yeah. Even if you just like hearing two high school buddies joke about movies and then sometimes talk about them seriously for a moment, or mispronounce things during a maybe not planned out that well pronunciation segment of a world tour miniseries, then we're glad we could entertain you, and we're glad we could share some information with you. But it's not the end of the season quite yet, because we still have a full episode ahead of us. And what movies are we talking about on this special season 1 finale Christmas episode, Jonathan?
Yeah, so we have picked out a couple weeks before Christmas 5 amazing Christmas movies. Some people's favorite movies, several of our favorite movies, a couple that we haven't seen as much, but ones that are well beloved all around. Starting with It's a Wonderful Life from 1946, directed by Frank Capra. It was nominated for a lot of awards, like Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Director, Best Sound Recording, and Best Editing. But it didn't win any awards, and kind of was a slow burn classic, which we'll talk about.
Yeah. And our second is a comedy Christmas classic, A Christmas Story from 1983, directed by Bob Clark and based on Gene Shepard's, and narrated by Gene Shepard, but based on Gene Shepard's In God We Trust, All Others Pay Cash, which is a very funny book. So I'm told. I haven't read it, but I watched the movie and I loved it.
And moving right along, near the end of the 80s, in 1988, we have the ever controversial Die Hard. We're going to get into the what makes a Christmas movie conversation today, directed by John McTiernan. Hopefully that's said right. And that was nominated for Best Sound, Best Editing, Best Sound Effects, and Best Visual Effects.
And of course, you didn't think we wouldn't come back to them eventually. We have The Muppet Christmas Carol from 1992, directed by Brian Henson, Jim Henson's son. And it was the first Muppet film made after Jim Henson's sorrowfully early death. But as we can see, the Muppets are still going strong, even though their creator is no longer with us. And this is my first time watching it this week, but I really loved it, and I could definitely see that it is a Christmas classic.
Absolutely. And speaking of Christmas classics, and even more modern than the Muppet movie, is Elf from 2003, directed by, of all people, Jon Favreau, which you may know from directing Iron Man and the latest live-action Jungle Book, and Chef. He starred and directed Chef. But this is, like I said, a modern Christmas classic. it feels more modern than maybe it is now that it's pushing 15 years old, but it's still great and the most recent of the movies that we're looking at.
Yeah, that's the one that I watch every year with my family multiple times.
Absolutely.
I'm sure many people of our generation do, and of many generations. It's a wonderful movie. But speaking of things that are wonderful, Jonathan, let's slide into our individual breakdowns. And do you want to tell us about the plot of It's a Wonderful Life?
Yeah, so It's a Wonderful Life from 1946 follows the story of George Bailey, who grew up in this little town called Bedford Falls. And we kind of see his whole life, essentially, from the time he's a child and loses hearing in one of his ears by saving his brother from drowning in a pool of ice, and all the way up to the point where he takes over his father's little building and loan business and gets married and settles down. But through all this, we're seeing this conflict of him constantly needing to stay in Bedford Falls, even though his dream since he was little was to travel and see the world and everything. And through this journey, we essentially get an appreciation for the little things in life. And we get this sense that, you don't have to go far away. You don't have to do something that reaches the entire world necessarily in order to have a very meaningful and wonderful life. And at the point of despair for George Bailey, he's lost a lot of money and contemplates suicide, at which point a guardian angel is sent to help him find meaning again by essentially showing him what his life would be like, or what everyone else's life would be like had he never been born. So we get to see this great character arc. It's one of the greatest character studies. Just a great movie, like aside from the Christmas season, but definitely ingrained in the Christmas tradition and the Christmas atmosphere.
Yeah, it is. Gosh, I almost said It's a Wonderful Movie, which it is. But it's just so easy to make puns with that title. But yeah, and it's a really deep movie too. Before we get into like some of the history of the film and how its reception, how it became a classic. But watching it this time, that's what really struck me, was the fact that it's a really deep movie, and it gets really dark. Darker than I remember. Right. And I think a lot of people like to associate Frank Capra with almost like this corny, rosy-eyed vision of America. But and we talked about this with Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, but again with It's a Wonderful Life, like it gets to some really dark places in this film and gets really hard on the characters, and the characters are not perfect people. Like George Bailey does one of two things on screen. Either he is having a hero moment where he does something wonderful, or he is complaining. Right. And there's some times where he's just being a wonderful guy too, of course, but he is a hero who complains about his lot in life, and he learns about it. But it's definitely not all roses and wonderosity, so to speak. But it deals with some hard stuff too. So it's a really deep Christmas movie with some real meat on its bones to sink into.
Yeah, because we talked about, because I like the fact that we're coming back to this after we have already done a whole week on Frank Capra and some of the films that he did. And we talked about kind of his love for telling stories of the little man and the kind of everyday person that anyone who picks this up and watches this can identify with. But he doesn't portray the everyman, the commoner, as a simpleton by any means. He knows the emotional depth that every person has, and he's not afraid to delve into that place, because when you come out of that, the catharsis is just that much more rewarding. And this is probably the height of Frank Capra's use of this emotional journey that he takes us on, and is why so many people consider this his best movie, and he even considers this his best movie.
And it's a shame, because while this might be his best movie, or at least one of his best movies, it was not received very well. It was definitely considered a financial failure at the time. Frank Capra.
It was kind of considered like a middle of the road, just okay, that's a fun kind of Christmassy deal.
Yeah, it had come up head to head in the same year with another movie called The Best Years of Our Lives from 1946 that dealt with veterans coming home from World War II. And The Best Years of Our Lives kind of dominated the critical reception. It dominated the public reception. And It's a Wonderful Life, which kind of strikes a similar-ish vein in terms of the scope of the story and the setting and the characters, just couldn't find its way in amidst that competition. But it did actually sink Liberty Films, which is Capra's own independent production company at the time, which was kind of a new thing that was starting to bubble up around the end of the 40s into the 50s, where directors and producers would have their own independent production companies. And you'd see that come to a head in the 60s, where people really started splitting off. But it pretty much sunk Frank Capra's Liberty Films. Liberty Films would go on to make one other movie. I can't remember the name of it. But it would eventually be bought by Paramount and kind of absorbed into the Paramount body. But It's a Wonderful Life would go on to become a Christmas classic on TV when syndicated movies became a thing on TV. And it would play every year around the holidays. And it was very popular, so it was always scheduled by TV networks. And it would just play every year. And, if you play a movie every year on the TV when there's only 3 channels, and it always comes on at the same time of year, it's going to become associated with that time of year. And so, of course, It's a Wonderful Life becomes associated with Christmas. And it does fall in a setting, a time and a place that is Christmas within the film. And it becomes a Christmas classic that we know and love to this day.
Yeah, and I think that along with that, the more that people are kind of exposed to a film like this, like the more you realize how truly great it is. And I can understand how a film like The Best Years of Our Lives, which is more focused on veterans coming home from war, would kind of take precedence in 1946 as soon as the war ends. But It's a Wonderful Life has a more of a longevity because it gets to something universal, and it does pull in elements of the war and a lot of like even just archival footage from the war. Frank Capra is one of the big directors who spent a lot of time in the war creating documentaries and creating like gathering actual footage from World War II. But the overall scope of the film just is so much more timeless than something that's only about war, because in times when we're not necessarily in a giant world-encompassing war, this film is still relatable and still relevant.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the focus of the film isn't Christmas. Like it takes place at Christmas time. The main arc of the story takes place at Christmas time, and the themes of the film are definitely connected to very Christmas time ideas, Christmassy themes.
Generosity and
exactly. But it isn't like a Christmas centric film plot wise. So it kind of embodies like the spirit of Christmas and was associated with Christmas through just the way it was played in syndication on TV networks, rather than being a Christmas movie in the sense of like A Christmas Story is a Christmas movie. Because the focus of A Christmas Story is about Christmas. It's definitely about Christmas. Mm-hmm. But It's a Wonderful Life, while it covers the scope of Christmas, pertains to the themes of Christmas, isn't about Christmas. It's about one man's struggles with his lot in life.
Yeah, and I think another thing that kind of just solidifies it even more as kind of a Christmas movie is the fact that the plot is a little bit of a twist on the most classic of all Christmas stories, A Christmas Carol, in which 3 ghosts are sent to teach Ebenezer Scrooge about generosity and the real meaning of life and Christmas. And in this one, it's almost as if a ghost is sent to teach Bob Cratchit to not be so hard on himself and to realize like what an impact he has. So it's along the same lines as one of the most renowned Christmas stories of all time, and just kind of told from a different story. And it's very, very different. But you can definitely see where those influences come in and why it just feels like a Christmas movie, even though technically you could take this movie and set it at any time of year and you could still get the same effect. It just kind of connects even more since those themes are just very Christmas related in themselves.
Yeah. And maybe it's just because it's a classic, but I can't imagine these scenes without snow. I can't imagine these scenes with like Easter eggs along the ground or 4th of July fireworks popping in the sky. Like it makes sense with the snow, with Christmas. And again, maybe that's just because I've seen it so many times around Christmas. But what doesn't matter what came first at this point. It's a Christmas classic.
But aside from the themes and just when the film is set, like the reason that the film is set at Christmas is because the idea came from a Christmas card. There was a story called The Greatest Gift, written by a man named Philip Van Dorenstern, and it wasn't really successful. He couldn't get it published, and so he kind of turned it into a Christmas card and just sent a bunch of copies to family and friends. And it eventually got in the hands of an RKO producer who showed it to Cary Grant's agent, and along the lines ended up in Frank Capra's hands, and he loved it and loved the idea of it and wrote a full script of it. So this is just from its origins is kind of associated with Christmas because it came from a Christmas card. So there you go. Your source material can come from anywhere, not only books and plays, but also even something as simple as a Christmas card.
Yeah, and that's one sly way to pitch your story idea there. Put it on a card. I'm sure that's like the only time that has worked or will ever work. Admirable story, but I would not try copying it.
But the thing that I found interesting is that the title slides at the beginning of the movie are kind of styled after very idealistic looking Christmas card illustrations and stuff like that. So it's a nice little tie-in.
Yeah, certainly. Okay, so on to our next film of the day, of the finale, A Christmas Story from 1983. Again, based on a book by Gene Shepard, and Gene Shepard is in the movie as the narrator, and he also has a cameo part in one scene of the film where the kids go to see Santa. So the story of A Christmas Story takes place in the 1940s in a post-World War II kind of economic boom times, and traces a young Midwestern family that I believe is in Chicago, or in the suburbs of Chicago, or Indiana, or something of that sort, but it's kind of generic Midwest, if you can just picture that in your mind. 1940s, but in color. Because it's.
But you probably don't need to, because you've probably seen this movie.
Most people have probably seen this movie, and it covers a very simple story, in episodic, complicated nature, and that is the story of a young boy named Ralphie, who's like 8 or 9, who wants a BB gun for Christmas, but everyone who he tells that he wants a BB gun for Christmas to. Responds by saying, "You'll shoot your eye out, kid." And that includes like his mom, his teacher, Santa Claus at the mall, everybody. And it's all about all of his schemes to both survive the Christmas season, in a sense, whether it be trying to get a passing grade in class or running away from bullies, or trying to convince his parents to get him a BB gun, whether it be planting ads around the house or so on. All sorts of shenanigans. But of course, this is a comedy film, so things go crazy. Turkeys get stolen by wild dogs. BB guns get fired in crazy places. Tongues get stuck to frozen poles. Which, by the way, fun fact, if you ever do get your tongue stuck to something that is frozen outside, pour some water on it. That'll let you take your tongue off of the frozen thing. The better piece of advice would be not to stick your tongue on the frozen thing
don't do
in
that.
the first place. But the plot of the film kind of takes place in this episodic nature that both gives a character study of the boy, a fleshing out of the world of the boy, his family life, his school life, his friend life, and also documents this very entertaining tale of his search and struggle to get a BB gun for Christmas.
Yeah, and the thing that's so interesting to me about this movie is just how much the film is basically structured on nostalgia and this idea of tradition, because almost every scene is in some sense like it's something that everyone can relate to in a different way than It's a Wonderful Life. It's like just remembering a childhood that even if you didn't have a childhood from that time period, you still remember, these like customs that kids come up with that don't really mean anything, but like the double dog dare and the triple dog dare, and like how important that is to a kid and how not important it really is. And this movie does a great job of showing like contrasting the stakes of kids and making them feel very important, but also putting them in just this big context where you remember a childhood, but you see it as an adult and just kind of look back on it fondly. And you're seeing all of the ups and downs of Christmas, like traditions that are really kind of silly, but you're seeing them in all of their silly and wonderful, and just like you see how kind of insignificant some of these things are, and yet how much they can just bring people together, and how great they are. Just as silly as they are, they're still wonderful.
Yeah. And just thinking about the timing of the movie, it comes out in 1983, which is about 40 years after this takes place in the 1940s. So kids who are growing up then would be solidly middle-aged when this film comes out, and prime targets to be movie-going audiences.
Yeah, so they would have like a literal nostalgia for the scenes portrayed in the film, but for people like us who definitely did not have the same kind of environment growing up, where we were growing up in the 90s and 2000s, it still has, like, you can still get that sense of nostalgia, like we've talked about with other movies, that kind of ride on a nostalgia for a time that most everyone has outlived. You can still present that sense through film, and that's one of the great things about film, is being able to keep little pockets of time alive in people's minds and imaginations.
Certainly. And of course, if you look at the source material, this is written by Gene Shepard, who of course narrates the film as well, and has a small cameo in the mall Santa scene. This is when he grew up. This is a lot of people. Well, it's kind of confused when you look at it, partially because he's a writer, he's a storyteller, and like so many writers and storytellers, it's kind of hard to discern the truths about their lives from the fictions. But apparently some of these episodes are either actually happened to Gene Shepard as a kid, or were based off of events that happened to Gene Shepard as a kid, which makes 100% sense. Like if you were going to write about a childhood Christmas from the point of view or set in the time period when you were a kid, of course you're going to pull from your own experiences. But, that's part of what makes it so thoroughly nostalgic, and that's part of what makes it feel kind of authentic and earnest amongst all this comedy. Like you don't feel like Ralphie's want for this BB gun is frivolous. Like maybe you can sit back and call it frivolous, but it seems earnest, it seems honest, it seems like the end of the world type, I must have this thing,
right?
Everything is awful scenarios that kids often imagine themselves are in, which, by the way, if you don't get the BB gun or whatever you want for Christmas, it probably isn't the end of the world. But of course, if you're young enough to think it is the end of the world, if you don't get it, you wouldn't listen to me telling you this, and that's just how life works. You'll grow up eventually.
Yeah, and one of the great ways that we are, actually, there are several like really wonderful ways that were put in Ralphie's head, because this is very much subjective point of view from Ralphie's point of view all the way through. Is first of all the use of the narrator, of using the actual author of the book as the narrator to just tell us what he's thinking, what he's perceiving about these situations, but also the use of stylized flashbacks, or not even flashbacks, but just like little imagination scenes, which are so much fun. Like the one where he's a cowboy with his Red Ryder BB gun saving his family from bandits, or he's blinded by soap poisoning and all this stuff. And they're just like so out there, and the movie itself is to some extent hyperbolized, but then you just kick it up to 11 with all of these imagination scenes, and you remember like thinking these things when you were a kid and like blowing everything out of proportion. And it's just like the tone of the movie is ridiculous but so consistent and so, like you were saying, earnest, that it's just enjoyable to watch all the way through.
Yeah, and of course the narrator is a really good way to work with a film where your main character is a kid, because it provides a lot of information that the kid doesn't have to worry about. And, you know, of course, kudos to Peter Billingsley, who played Ralphie. He did seriously a fantastic job.
Yeah, he did.
But to have Gene Shepard step in and narrate the kid as well really fleshes out the character in a way that just the kid by himself would not have been able to do. And it's one of those situations where the narration actually adds to the film rather than detracting from it. Original Blade Runner. Although that's contentious. Like, some people will argue that the narrated version is better. I think they're wrong.
Oh, man.
But
I love Harrison Ford, but that is the worst noir voiceover ever.
Yeah, no, it's better without it. But that's a conversation for a different episode on a different day.
But speaking of the narrator, this film was actually a pretty large inspiration for another piece of nostalgic media, in this case television, that uses a narrator to explain a kid's experience, and that is The Wonder Years. This was actually kind of this style, which if you've ever wondered, like, hey, The Wonder Years kind of has that same kind of deal going on as A Christmas Story. The creators actually took inspiration from this movie, and it works beautifully because, like you were saying, it is a great way to put you in a kid's head. And if you have a grown man narrating a kid's thoughts and taking these things very seriously, like a Double Dog Dare, then you're able to just kind of get into it a lot faster because the piece is taking itself seriously. So that's just kind of a fun connection between two great nostalgic pieces.
All right, so next we're going to talk about our third of 5 films that we're doing today on the episode, and it's one that has a lot of great things going for it, but we're probably going to spend most of our time talking about whether or not it's a Christmas movie. Die Hard from 1988. Jonathan, do you want to explain the plot of Die Hard to us?
So Die Hard is the story of John McClane, who is a New York cop who has just traveled to LA to attend his wife's Christmas party and surprise her. She's gotten a job across the country and has kind of put a strain on their marriage, which the movie shows, not tells us, in several pretty creative ways. But anyway, at some point during the party, he is kind of recovering from his flight, and the rest of the party gets held up by terrorists and headed by the
Professor
always
Snape.
Wonderful Alan Rickman, who is just wonderful in everything. But so John McClane escapes this hostage takeover, unknown to the terrorists at first, and proceeds to kind of take them out one by one and trying to find a way to save the whole party from inside of the building. And eventually some other cops get involved, some that are helpful, some that are not very helpful. But all of this crazy mayhem and action takes place at a Christmas party. And so for however long since this movie came out, people have wondered, is this a Christmas movie or is it just a movie that takes place at Christmas? So let us begin.
All right. So I have put a lot of time into thinking about this week. And, well, of course, the desire is to split it into two sides, right? There are people who say, of course, it's a Christmas movie. It takes place at Christmas. That makes anything that takes place at Christmas a Christmas movie. And there are people who say it's not about Christmas. That doesn't make it a Christmas movie. It just happens to take place at Christmas. And I wanted to say my original argument is that if it is a movie that evokes the feeling of Christmas to you, which, man, that is that is a amorphous concept right there. So whatever it means to you, like if you watch a movie, think about a movie, and suddenly you're thinking about Christmas, whatever your Christmas time looks like wherever you are, then that is a Christmas movie for you. And now, of course, after we spent some time talking about It's a Wonderful Life, which isn't really about Christmas, it's like Christmas adjacent and Christmas is attached to the theme.
It's about the things that Christmas is about.
Right. I was like, maybe Christmas can be tangential to the theme. Maybe not everything has to be How the Grinch Stole Christmas or A Christmas Story to be a Christmas movie. So
it doesn't have to say Christmas in the title.
It doesn't have to have Christmas in the title. It can be Christmas theme related and have Christmas, as part of the movie and still be a Christmas movie. But in Die Hard, for me, that would make the question, is the theme of Die Hard Christmas related, or is Christmas just used as a nice way to set the scene? Which, by the way, it really does. Like, so even if you don't want to consider it a thematically Christmas movie or a Christmas movie at all or whatever, like the use of Christmas in the film to set a scene, set a time and place, set a conflict, like this is a dad who wants to come see the estranged part of his family, his wife, who is, I don't think they're actually separated. It's very amorphous.
Yeah.
And his two kids who are in LA, then the use of Christmas to set that up is very effective. But I don't know if it connects to a Christmas theme. What do you think, Jonathan?
So here's my thought, because I was thinking about this also when we were talking about It's a Wonderful Life. And let me just point out the fact that, well, aside from the fact that the movie sets itself up as a Christmas movie, there is Christmas music incorporated into the score of this film, like all the way through. Almost every score is based on a classic Christmas hymn or Christmas song. So there's that to start with. The movie kind of is saying that it's a Christmas movie.
There's kind of like this really good leitmotif they use that's like a part of the melody. It's like an incomplete melody of Joy to the World that you hear whenever like Alan Rickman is on screen. And then once like he dies or towards the end of the film, sorry, spoilers. If you didn't know already, Hans Gruber, Alan Rickman dies. It's a 1980.
One of the most famous villain deaths.
Yeah. I'm sure you've seen the GIF. But towards the end of the movie, you actually hear Joy to the World in its entirety. You actually get the full melody. So it's like they're playing with you throughout the course of the film. They're building that tension because you hear Joy to the World, but you don't hear it in its completion. And then once you hear it in its finality, your brain's been itching for it, and you're like, oh, okay, this is good. This is completion. This is catharsis. Yeah. So they do set up Christmas as part of the setting, and they use it as part of the leitmotif, as part of the score. I'm just not sure.
So that's my first point. There's also the fact that, like you've already mentioned, the story revolves around a family coming back together, an estranged family reuniting and bonding again, which is a pretty central Christmas theme in every Christmas movie. And also the villain is a miserly person who just wants a bunch of money.
Yeah, he's not a terrorist. He's a thief. Again, more spoilers.
Yeah, he's an exceptional thief.
Yes.
But that is one of the tenets of a Christmas movie, is a bad guy obsessed with money, be it Ebenezer Scrooge or Potter from It's a Wonderful Life. So you have your bad guy who is only concerned with money and stinginess, and you have a family coming together theme and learning teamwork and working together, and you have just the score and the setting and the music, non-diegetic music being worked in, and I think there's a pretty solid argument for saying that it is a Christmas movie.
Okay. In that case, let me ask you this. If you take the kids out of the movie, because honestly, like, the kids are not...
Well, the kids are not in the movie.
The kids are barely in the movie. Like, they're there, you see them, and they're there, like, at the start and at the end and a little bit in the middle, in cutaway scenes, really. But if you remove them from the picture and it's just a man reuniting with his wife or a man reuniting with his girlfriend, is it still a Christmas movie? Because that's romance more than it is family.
I would think so. I think that it's still, I mean, a family of two is still a family. Even, and this is going to be the most ridiculous thing I've ever said, but if a Hallmark Christmas movie is a Christmas movie, then two people joining together in a spirit of Christmas constitutes a Christmas film. And aside from that, you have the other policeman, Al, who is working on the other side, and they kind of have this bonding. So it's about community and it's about family. And the fact is that the kids are in there. So it just kind of strengthens that point either way.
Okay, I could see that. And of course, you know, we have to say the big reason that a lot of people don't consider it a Christmas movie is because it's made its fame off of being an action movie. Like, that's the genre it's fallen into. Unlike, you know, something like A Christmas Story or Elf or The Muppet Christmas Carol, and you look at it and you ask yourself, what genre is this? And you say Christmas movie. If you can even really call that a genre.
Is Christmas movie a genre?
Yeah,
right.
That's a good question.
You have It's a Wonderful Life, which probably falls definitely more in the drama category, and
also
our
fantasy.
other three movies. Yeah, in a sense. And our other three movies besides Die Hard fall pretty solidly in the comedy category. So Christmas movies do not have a set genre. I believe that.
Well, yeah. And here's the other thing about genre. It is kind of bullshit. It is a way, because we are people and we do what people do and we like to categorize things. We like to split movies up into ways of thinking about movies, and we like to look at movies and be able to point at it and go, that is an action movie, that is a Christmas movie, that is a comedy movie, that is a drama movie, that is a Western movie. And there are so many problems with that because most movies are like a little bit of everything, or at least a little bit of all things. Like, what
it has its uses, but it definitely has limitations as well.
Think about a Western movie. That's also a drama movie. Like, by default,
it's action,
it is also a drama movie,
often
an action movie, and an adventure movie. And so, what is Western, like a collective form of genre? And of course, there's been a lot of ink spilled on the subject. And if you ever want to read about it, I don't know, go to film school. Who cares? But
that's also something that I'm always interested in when people say that, calling someone a genre director or a genre movie, because that means Western or sci-fi, basically.
Yeah, that's
but
really what
why does
people
that
are
have
saying.
to be Western or sci-fi? Because everything falls into some kind of a genre, and yet we have demoted basically everything besides drama and just kind of put it in this kind of subcategory that is like, well, why?
Yeah, but every kind of drama is its own little genre too. Like, is it a biopic? Is it a romance? Is it like a business intrigue pick? Is it a mystery pick? Well, every film is inherently a mystery, and there you go too. So it's really hard to define. But that being said, it is, as much as I kind of hate the concept, it still is really useful because you can throw out these words and they come along with prepackaged ideas and assumptions about what the movie's going to be about and look like and contain and act. and be written and be shot and yada, 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 yada. And they're fairly accurate. And it's also a great way, you can really have fun with them when you start mixing them, because every movie is multiple genres, as I think I pretty much just established. And Die Hard can easily be both genres. It just so happens, and by both genres I mean action and Christmas and family, and there's some comedy, and there's a lot of drama in there, and there's mystery because you don't know the terrorist are actually thieves when you first meet
motivation,
them. And a cop, a kind of a buddy cop movie via walkie-talkie, and see, here we go. We just go down this rabbit hole. But it got labeled as an action movie, and it is a phenomenal action movie. The stunts are fantastic. The effects are fantastic. The lighting is not what I expected at all. It's really, it's fantastic.
Surprisingly good.
It's really great. Of course,
anamorphic, just use of anamorphic lens and lens flares was like
all of
amazing.
The colored light and the stylized light was beautiful. The lens, and you're right, the lens flare was ridiculous. It just kept going during like these pans. I was like, is it just gonna keep coming? Is this where did JJ just watch this movie on repeat growing up? Is that how he got it?
Right. It's possible.
I don't know how old he is. I don't know. Now I'm going to have to go look that up. But yeah, so yes, Die Hard is a Christmas movie. Is that its main genre? I would say no. I would say it is mainly an action movie.
I think the thing that trips people up, and as far as this conversation about genre, is that this may be the only action Christmas movie, and that's why people are so hesitant to put it in the Christmas categories, because you hadn't seen a Christmas movie that is also primarily an action movie before. So it's like, do they compute? So Alex, does Die Hard Christmas?
Yes.
Yes, I agree.
Man, if you got that reference, tweet us.
Yeah, please.
Please. We like you. Okay.
So moving on, Alex, tell us about the Muppet Christmas Carol, and let's get some Muppets back in the show.
Yeah, let's do it. Hey, Hayden, I know you're listening. How's it going, buddy? So the Muppet Christmas Carol from 1992 is a Muppet movie. I think the title kind of gives that away, but in case you're wondering how it's structured, in terms of who's playing what parts, most of them are Muppets, and the rest are Michael Caine and the actors playing his family, as Michael Caine plays Scrooge. And of course, this is the classic Dickens story, A Christmas Carol, just with a Muppets twist on it. And to show you how, or to tell you how they did it, they use Gonzo and Rizzo kind of as our narrators for the duration. Gonzo is essentially Charles Dickens, and of course there's some fourth wall breaking humor about whether or not Gonzo's actually Charles Dickens, or if he's just pretending to be Dickens, and so on and so forth, because it's the Muppets, and of course we have to break the fourth wall. It's great.
And they have fun, omniscient narrator jokes about, like, of course I know what's going to happen. I told you. I wrote the book.
Yeah, and there's a lot of great physical, visual comedy about how they get from scene to scene, as like the ghosts are taking Scrooge from here to there and there to here. Like one time, Scrooge flies off with one of the ghosts, and they toss a grappling hook around his leg and then ride him into the next scene. And then other times they just appear in the next scene, kind of just whatever works, whatever's interesting. But it follows the really basic story of Scrooge, who is a grumpy old man who is had a sad, lonely life, and his only love is money. At this point, his business partners die. I never thought I'd be
both of them in this
both
one.
of them, because they're played by the old crotchety pair, Statler and Waldorf. Have died. and they come back from the dead to warn Scrooge that he is going to be visited by 3 ghosts, and they will show him how he's been living his life incorrectly and how he can properly embrace the Christmas spirit and lead a better, happier, more fulfilling life. And of course, that happens. Spoilers, old story that has been told.
Charles Dickens doesn't get spoiled
nearly a billion times by now, I'm sure. So you have probably heard of this. Anyway, of course, Bob Cratchit is played by Kermit the Frog, who is actually married to Miss Piggy in this one, who plays his wife, and they have an assortment of children played by a mix of pigs and frogs. Don't ask me how that works. I don't know. The youngest...
And they don't address it. That's one of the things they don't break the fourth wall about.
No. Of course they can't. I mean, the Muppets aren't supposed to be like kid entertainment, but it's not supposed to be like dry, weird fantasy biology entertainment either. But of course, there's Tiny Tim, who is like a little mini Kermit, who's adorable.
Pretty darn adorable, yeah.
Oh, so adorable. And the voice is perfectly like innocent, with a hint of like borderline being pathetic, but also like this really strong conviction in it too.
Dare I say lame?
Oh my gosh. And that is pretty much it. There's your characters. Of course, we have a few different classic Muppets playing different characters. Fozzie Bear plays Fezwig or Fozziewig, and Sam the Eagle
Fezziwig,
plays Scrooge's old headmaster, and you run into some of the other ones throughout the background. I thought it was interesting. You actually saw some of the dog cops from Dog City in the street scene, and the opening street scene actually reminded me a lot of the opening street scene from Dog City, which, if you don't know or haven't seen it, is a short film about 30 minutes that was done by Jim Henson and his Muppet Workshop or his Creature Workshop. I don't know which one, but it's about a bunch of dogs living in a city, and they call it Dog City.
It's a noir film made up of dogs.
Lots of puns too. But it's great.
Yeah. But the interesting thing about the Muppet Christmas Carol that I think would be interesting to talk about is, just basically taking such a classic work and incorporating Muppets into it and the same Muppet humor and heart that we're used to. And one of the most interesting things to me is that for the most part, and I can't say if this is true throughout, but on the whole, I think that Scrooge's dialogue is pretty much straight from the story, and then all the Muppets kind of have their own script where they add in jokes and stuff like that. But it's kind of funny seeing like Michael Caine as this character who kind of doesn't fit. He doesn't get like all the things that are going on around him, which is the character. It's Ebenezer Scrooge, who doesn't understand the happiness and the way of life of everyone around him. But just kind of putting that relief of Michael Caine against all of these Muppets and keeping his dialogue as Dickens's Victorian script, and the Muppets keeping their humor while still keeping to the heart and purpose of the story was just pulled off exceptionally well. Yeah.
It's actually a pretty impressive showing for the first, basically the directorial debut of Brian Henson. Only 2 years.
Who, of course, had been around his father quite a bit, and so
he had worked with him on Labyrinth and many other projects.
The other thing about this film is that it is a musical, and there are several musical numbers throughout, given to the whole cast and certain characters and stuff like that. Mostly on the commoner side, Bob Cratchit and Tiny Tim gets a song and stuff, but the songs were really good. Like, they weren't just kind of thrown together. Like, I could totally see this show being done on a staged performance or something, because it was just a great ensemble musical rendition of a classic story.
Yeah, and it was visually pulled off really well. Of course, you have the snow and stuff, and you have the Muppets, which are always great to look at on camera, textured very well. But what really blew me away was the design of the ghosts themselves. The first one is just like a trip. Like the Ghost of Christmas Past
Is
looks like
a little bit terrifying.
a little bit. I don't know if it was meant to be. Had like the baby doll face with like a white sheet around
body.
it. It looked like they filmed it in a water tank and superimposed it on.
Yeah, it reminded me of what Hayden was talking to us about in our Jim Henson episode, where they were filming all the Aqua dance sequences, and they built water like Muppets for use underwater that wouldn't disintegrate or something. And I was wondering, Hayden could probably tell us more about this, but I was wondering if they created one of those kind of waterproof Muppets and then filmed it and superimposed it into these scenes.
Yeah. And I thought it was actually a pretty bold choice. I went into the movie expecting each of the three ghosts to be like a recognizable Muppet character just playing a ghost.
Oh yeah,
and
that would make sense.
That's what I expected. And so you get to the first ghost, and it's this terrifying thing, but in a very odd way. I could describe it. I could probably write a few hundred words just describing how weird that thing made me felt. But
yeah, it's very different than the normal Muppets.
But it was a bold choice, and it works. And of course, the Ghost of Christmas Present is a large walk-around Muppet, like Sweetums on the roster of Muppet characters, who changes and shrinks and grows as he gets bigger and larger and older over the course of the day, and is pulled off pretty well. And of course, I thought I really loved the Ghost of Christmas Future. I thought,
yeah, that was my favorite also.
Yeah. And partially I loved it because he looked incredible. He's like this big, oversized, hooded figure that looks like a drawing from the set of a German expressionist film, with these big, creepy hands, and he just kind of points at things. Partially I loved him because he looked cool, and partially I loved him because just like thinking of Michael Caine's perspective, like that's a really solid, creepy, imposing figure to react off of. Like that's genuinely frightening to be around. Like the Ghost of Christmas Past was clearly superimposed later on. Like that was a visual effect. So he kind of had to act off of nothing or stand in. But for this, like that gives your actor something physical to work with, and that really pays off when he has to do this big emotional scene where he really realizes the consequences of his actions and is like, "Oh man, please tell me I have a chance to fix my life." It just leads to a really great sequence and scene.
But the one ghost that was a recognizable Muppet character, or two, I should say, is Marley, who were played by Statler and Waldorf. So you have Jacob Marley like normal, and then they added Robert Marley, which was just kind of hilarious to put in Bob Marley. But they actually have one of my favorite song sequences, and actually really impressive because they're ghosts, and Jacob Marley's character is covered in chains and all this. But the way that they superimpose it and actually cover it from several different angles and reaction shots of Michael Caine, but yet they're added in after the fact and superimposed, and adding smoke effects and stuff like that. Just that whole scene was really well done. It was super impressive. But speaking of Jacob Marley and Michael Caine reacting against him, I mean, we have to talk about Michael Caine because he, of course, is great in everything and is great. Ebenezer Scrooge, not the greatest singer, I must say. He has a little bit at the end that I was like, okay, he got through it, but that's pretty much all I could say. But for the rest of the film, he does a great, in the classic story, and just plays Ebenezer Scrooge brilliantly, and he's just always a delight to watch.
Certainly. And by the end, he's been through so much. He's completed his character arc. He's earned a maybe less than sublime singing scene at the end.
Of course, he's also surrounded by a bunch of puppets, which I'm sure was a pretty new experience for him.
Yeah, no, I imagine that's off-kiltering to be around all those Muppets on a raised platform with a bunch of people sitting underneath you. Interesting. Interesting
Yeah,
scenario.
especially for such a trained British professional actor as Michael Caine.
Yeah, I bet it's still better than having to eat like 100 Belgian waffles.
That's true.
That's true.
Speaking of eating a lot of syrup.
Speaking of eating a lot of syrup, let's transition to our final, and dare I say, maybe my personal favorite film of the day, Elf from 2003. I know a lot of people disagree with me on that. A lot of people wouldn't. Shout out to you people. But it's near and dear to my heart, and it's a big family movie for me. Me and my family watch it every year, multiple times at Thanksgiving and Christmas. But Jonathan, why don't you describe that one for us?
So Elf is about basically a baby. We start off seeing a baby who inadvertently crawls into Santa's gift bag when he's delivering toys to an orphanage. So he gets carried back to the North Pole and is raised by elves. And his name is Buddy, is what they dub him. And at some point, he learns that he is, in fact, a human. And Santa explains to him who his father is and tells him that he works in New York at a magical place called the Empire State Building.
It's not that magical.
So, well, to a elf who's lived in the North Pole his whole life, it is pretty magical. And that is the journey that we follow as Buddy travels to New York, and it's basically a great big fish out of water story, and it's hilarious watching basically an innocent child who is portrayed by a grown man in Will Ferrell exploring one of the I guess roughest big city kind of environments and learning a new custom and trying to reconnect with his father, who doesn't want anything to do with him. He's kind of a bad memory for him. And we get to see the Christmas spirit come to the whole city and to the whole world. And along the way, Buddy finds love, and he melts his father's heart. And it is a great, hilarious, and heartwarming story all around, and just so much fun.
Certainly. And we have to mention the all-star cast that kind of carries the movie. In addition to Jon Favreau, who is a really great director who has done work across a bunch of different genres.
Yeah, he's so versatile.
He's done so many different things, and we've been kind of struggling to put together an episode for him because he's been so all over the place. But hopefully we'll figure it out and get to him one of these weeks. But not this season. But of course, you have this all-star cast. You have Will Ferrell as Buddy, James Caan as Walter, Bob Newhart as Papa Elf, and one of Zooey Deschanel's earlier film roles as Jovi. And she does a really good job as the love interest across the film, along with a number of just really memorable scenes that Will Ferrell's enthusiasm for the world around him just carries. It's so refreshing in contrast to the humdrum, beat down feel of working in New York in the winter.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the idea, is that contrast, and picking one of the most hustle and bustle and just kind of push environments, and adding just this flavor of, again, innocence and fun and color, and seeing how that incorporates everything. Basically, if you take the mailroom scene, it's kind of like a little version of the whole movie, where Buddy is thrown into the mailroom at the bottom of the Empire State Building, and he realizes that everyone there is totally unhappy with their job, and they have this very mundane routine of putting mail up these tubes. And eventually, through a mishap with some non-virgin drinks,
gets mixed up with some stuff that is not syrup.
Yeah. And so everyone ends up letting their hair down, in a sense, and having a lot of fun. And that's what happens throughout this whole film with everyone that Buddy encounters. And so kind of in the way that we talked about characters in the Last Picture Show being a whirlwind of destruction, Buddy is a whirlwind of joy and life, and it's great.
Yeah, certainly. And of course, there's a lot of big lessons over the course of the film, but one of the biggest lessons that we get towards at the end is that Santa is real.
Yeah, of course. That's the most important lesson that any Christmas movie can teach.
Yeah, it's one of those things that can make Christmas movies an instant classic, much like Miracle on 34th Street, which is a fantastic movie. Also has a mailroom scene, which I did not realize until I watched it this week. And I was wondering if those two might be connected, but I'm not 100% sure.
But speaking of references, I was actually thinking for the first time when I watched Elf this week that a scene near the end of the film when Buddy is very dejected. He's kind of been rejected by his father and starts to realize that he's different from everyone around him and feeling like he has no place. And he ends up on a bridge in the snow looking down into the water and is intercepted by what is essentially a falling angel. And so I thought that had a couple rings of familiarity.
Well, how many rings? I need to know how many angels got their wings.
9 reindeer?
Nine reindeer are there? Just ringing a lot. Man, that is just... Yeah. That's impractical. That was back in an age where nobody expected somebody to sit down and try to do the math on a movie. Like, It's a Wonderful Life. Nobody thought, like, oh, somebody's going to count how many times the bells ring over the course of this movie and post it on Reddit.
Right. And the other thing is when Nick, after basically George Bailey's been taken out of the picture, and Nick at the bar, the new rough and tough bartender, keeps doing the cash register. Like, do those count if it was kind of a alternate universe that Clarence had brought him to, or do they actually count? I don't know.
That's a great question. Or do when they slip back to the alternate timeline, do those angels then lose their wings because they've gone back in time and then have to relive in the new timeline a scenario in which they get their wings?
A lot of complicated questions that only the internet could have made possible.
Yes. I'm not sure if that's a good thing, but it's a thing now. So there.
Back to Elf, our other alternate timeline.
Back to Elf. And the question of what made it a classic so fast. And of course,
because this was basically became a classic and a holiday tradition for so many families as soon as it came out. Like, this film we say it's 15 years old, and that feels pretty old, but compared to It's a Wonderful Life, which is a classic because we're still watching it 50 years later, this is a fairly new film to have such a reputation as a classic. It's what we call an instant classic, and what makes it that.
Yeah. So of course there's what we talked about when we talked about It's a Wonderful Life, is that it's so strongly associated with one season, one time of year, that it gets associated with that time of year, and you expect to see it every time of that every year when that time comes up. So every time it's Christmas time, you kind of associate Elf with it already, just because of the way the movie's built, the topic, so on. But that's pretty much a given. What I think really makes this a classic, especially among Christmas classics, because Lord knows there's so many Christmas movies made every year that are so kind of just generic, and they're there and they come out and they're like a Hallmark movie or whatever. But Elf is unique in the way it's told. It's told as a storybook, which is a big plot device. And two, it just bubbles over with enthusiasm. Not just from Will Ferrell, but from everybody, from Jon Favreau and his direction, from the set designers, from the actors, hell, even from the extras. Like, all of the scenes with the Elf extras are pure gold. Zoe Deschanel,
which I believe Peter Billingsley is actually one of the elves from Santa's Workshop at the beginning. I think he's the one who is grilling Buddy on his quota.
Is he really? Oh yes, Peter Billingsley plays Ming Ming. Huh. Well, now I'll definitely have to view that scene a bit differently than I did last time. But yes, of course, Zooey Deschanel and Scott Caan give great performances in their roles, and everybody else on top of.
And of course, we can't forget Peter Dinklage, who
before Game of Thrones.
Yeah, before his fame on Game of Thrones,
almost a decade before Game of Thrones, I think.
Yeah, and he kind of and one of the things that I've always thought is that if you want to have basically brand loyalty for actors, is be in a really good kids film, and then those kids will grow up and they'll see all of your more mature films. And that's kind of, I guess, what Peter Dinklage did, not on purpose, but just being in this film makes him so recognizable to so many people who grew up with this movie, like us. And then you're like, oh, okay, I'm invested in Peter Dinklage because I loved him in Elf.
Yeah, no, that's where I knew him from. And so when I finally got to Game of Thrones, I started watching that. Everybody was like, yeah, you should check out this Peter Dinklage guy. I haven't seen him before, but he's so cool. And I was like, oh, that's the South Pole elf.
Angry elf.
That's Miles Finch. He's got a notebook. He was going to accidentally leave it behind. But yeah, it and part of it, of course, is luck. I mean, it hit at the right time. It hit kids at the right time that they would love it and want to see it year after year. And of course, when you mention star power, a lot of the people who are stars at the time this film comes out are still stars today. Peter Dinklage, Will Ferrell, Zooey Deschanel.
Yeah, and Bob Newhart, who's kind of just always been a star.
Yeah. Scott Caan, so on and so on and so on. So now, whenever you see them or you see their work, you still think of Elf. And of course, we live in the age of the internet, and Elf is both a movie that is eminently quotable and eminently gifable.
Memeable, yeah.
So many gifs. There's plenty of times that I will quote this in my day-to-day life, and I'm ashamed to admit it. There's many times that I've lived by those 4 food groups. I try not to do it often. Hopefully I don't, but there's bad days. Anyway, yes.
And I think the other thing that makes this an instant classic is that it hits all the right notes. Again, like we've been talking about, it is, for one, nostalgic. It just surrounds itself with Christmas traditions that have been around forever, and putting a new spin on them and seeing someone who's just like way more exuberant about them than everyone else who's just kind of been doing these traditions over and over again. So it breathes new life into old traditions. It is about family, reconnecting estranged family. It has a miserly, money-centric antagonist who learns the true meaning of Christmas and the true meaning of family and life. And it has, Santa Claus. So, you've got, you've hit everything, and you've just done it with so much exuberance and so much joy. And you've hit also a huge demographic. It is a family movie in the most extreme sense, where everybody of every age group and every kind of demographic can watch this and just find something to love about it. And so that's what makes it so great for so many people.
Yeah. And of course, it helps that the protagonist is maybe one of the most likable protagonists ever in the history of film.
Right.
Like which
is amazing to me, because not everybody loves Will Ferrell, but even people who don't enjoy Will Ferrell movies in general, like as a I guess type of movie, love Elf because he's so fun,
earnest. Like he strikes this this chord of like innocence and pure earnestness and honesty and enthusiasm for the world that isn't like affected or put on in any way. It just is there. It's like he dug down to his own inner child and revealed it on screen and just went wild with it after drinking too much maple syrup before each take.
And it also has a perfect tone consistency. Like, the movie takes itself seriously in how much fun it's having. Like, there is this wonderful balance of this movie that is having fun and being silly, but also taking itself seriously. Like, it's not just winking at the audience and shoveling jokes down our throat. It's just the way that things are presented seriously come off as funny.
Yes, of course. And it's presented in a visually unique way, and kind of the storybook setting where you have these on-screen animated claymation characters and the entire North Pole opening few sequences.
Right. Which are nostalgic in themselves from the classic Rudolph and Frosty movies.
Yeah, from the Ray Harryhausen animations. Look like something out of a picture book, look like something out of an animated film. And, to flip-flop it on its head and have that be the normal world for Buddy, and the fantastic world he goes to is New York, is hilarious in and of itself. No, it really is a remarkable piece of work that feels like it was made for fun. Like, obviously, like, yes, this is people's jobs, but it doesn't feel like somebody sat around in a boardroom and was like, what things would hit these demographics? Let's use those.
Yeah, it feels like a group of friends sitting around saying, "What if?" Okay, listen to this, and then just like having a ball writing this thing.
Yeah, like, what if we use a mailroom? What if he builds a rocking horse? What if he decorates every single location he ever enters? That's
right.
One of the best character traits I've ever seen. He just like compulsively decorates. And of course, we're both biased in talking about this movie.
Because it's definitely of our generation.
Oh, it certainly is. Yes. I'm not sure if I've ever met anybody who dislikes Elf. I've definitely met people who have not been as enthused about it as I have.
Yeah, just indifferent.
But of course, it is the world. There's a lot of people, and I'm sure if I went to the Letterboxd page for Elf, I'd find somebody who hates it. I'm not going to do that, though, because I don't feel like being mad today.
Don't surround yourself by angry elves,
yes,
Alex.
No, I need happy North Pole elves. Anyway, let's slide in to overall notes.
Yeah, so, I mean, we've kind of been talking about a lot of these overall points, but I think one of the takeaways is just the wide variety of Christmas movies. Again, there are, like, loose qualifications for a Christmas movie, like themes of generosity and family and joy and stuff like that, and but within those very loose constraints you can do so much, and there are so many different kinds of Christmas movies that come out every year, but there are only a pretty select number that become classics and that become traditions that people watch over and over and over again. And that is something unique among this category of films, among other films, that some films, like, you watch at different times that you're if you're feeling a certain emotion, you're like, okay, I want to watch this kind of movie, or different times of the year. But Christmas movies are kind of unique in that you watch them, you pick ones that you like and you enjoy, and you watch them every year at a certain time. And building traditions around film is something that's so cool and so fun. And when you have other people that have the same traditions and the same films, and you can experience them together and quote them together and stuff like that, it just kind of makes Christmas movies special in that way, and associated with this season. And it makes them so different from other kinds of movies.
Yeah. And whether that be that movie is Elf, or It's a Wonderful Life, or Die Hard, or some random Hallmark movie that struck that one chord that one year with your family, like, it doesn't matter, because these movies grow to mean something more than just the movie if you watch them every year with your family or your friends or the ones you love. and they can take on more meaning in that way and grow to be more than just the film they were. We can definitely assign more meaning to films than they have from the second we hit play on them.
And that's something that's, again, special with these movies. And it kind of brings, it kind of makes the films come true in a certain way, in that when you do these things over and over again, and if you do them with family and with the people that you love, like, it brings you together. These films do what they're setting out to do and what they're portraying, which is bringing people together in an experience of, hopefully leaving the film with more joy than when you entered it, and being closer together with the people that you experienced it with. And that's it's a great thing that Christmas movies are able to almost instantly bring about their objective, again, in a way that some other films maybe can't.
Yeah. And of course, as we move forward in time, we're going to have a larger and larger roster of Christmas movies from which to pull. And even looking at the ones we've talked about today, there's ones from 10 years ago, there's ones from 20 years ago, there's ones from like over 50 years ago. It's a Wonderful Life is like 70 years ago. It's 71 years ago. So that's an old movie.
But it's just a testament to how universal these themes are. And like, again, there are like hundreds and hundreds of Christmas movies made this time of year every year.
Lots of them are awful. But
yeah,
sometimes.
Bad Moms Christmas, whatever it is that year, that's just kind of put out to ride on the season. But if it's done with care and, hits the right notes and stuff like that, it can live to be nearly 100 years old, like It's a Wonderful Life. And I expect It's a Wonderful Life to still be as poignant and as fondly remembered 30 years from now when it's 100 years old as it was as it became popular in the 50s and 60s.
Oh, wow. That's going to be 100 years old. Oh, boy.
It is.
I thought I was having a hard time with Elf being like 14 years old. Interesting. Well, that's heavy. Well, that's about it for that season. But we're still not done with this episode because we have to talk about next season, next year, 2018. What's coming up in 2018, Jonathan?
Yeah, so we're going to take 2 weeks off to kind of recuperate, but we will be back on January 9th. And the first thing we're going to talk about is one of the greatest of all directors, of whose movies we have only watched one out of the 100 and almost 50 something movies that we've watched this year. And that is Alfred Hitchcock. And we are going to do another series of episodes similar to the World Tour. So it will be a several weeks of just diving into Alfred Hitchcock and the many movies that he made and themes and characters that are living in famously or infamously in cinema history. And it should be a really interesting and great learning experience for us and hopefully for you guys.
And of course, in 2018, we'll be looking to see what we can do with the podcast to make it better, to grow it a bit, to make it all the much better for us as a learning experience and for you guys as entertainment or an educational experience. So make sure you're following us on Twitter and or Facebook, where we will be placing some items or releasing some information or making announcements or however you want to call it about upcoming things we have going on in 2018.
Yeah, so there's potential for merch, and we may be opening a Patreon channel just to keep the podcast feasible and just full of information as much as we can gather for you guys. So stay up to date with that.
Yes, please do. Well, that's about all the time we have for this year.
If you have movie suggestions for us or just want to reach out, I can be found on Twitter at @JSSatchel.
And I'm at Alex Geringer.
And to find links to things that we talked about today, you can view them on the blog at thefilmlings.com.
If you like the show, let us know. Leave us a review on iTunes so other people know what we're all about.
We definitely appreciate it.
Talk to you next year.
All right, see ya.
Okay, so I have thought a lot about this week, because of course the desire is to split it really hard lineup. Wait, what? I'm sorry, my eyes drifted, and why does it say My Cocaine underneath the Muppet Christmas Carol?
We have to talk about Michael Caine.
Oh gosh, okay, I'm so sorry. That totally derailed me.
We can't talk about the Muppets without Michael Caine.
Okay.